Hi everyone, I'm Ashley Turner. I'm the Director of External Affairs for the DeVos Sport Business Management Program at UCF. Longest title, long story short, Vince and I are going to answer all your questions about how to maximize your college experience. We're going to answer questions you didn't know you had. What internship should you get? How should you network? How do you follow up? How do you volunteer? How do I write a resume? All those things we're going to discuss in this panel. We're so excited. We're so glad to be a part of Sports Biz Camps. Can't wait to see you.
Sure.
Awesome. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you. Hi, Vince.
Hello. I am the Vince that was mentioned in the introduction. You've seen my face a few times throughout the morning, and thank you all for being here. We're going to first go through some introductions, but before I do, I'm going to begin this one the way we ended the last and say that the very first thing to know about maximizing your college experience is to take advantage of the access that you have. So there's a Q&A box that hopefully you're familiar with using. If you're in a Zoom function, it should be right towards the bottom of your screen. Use that because that's how we're going to be sure to answer the questions that you have. Otherwise, we've got a script of questions to run through. We'll share our own personal experiences and drop off some advice throughout the conversation. So I'll introduce myself because you got a chance to do so with a little bit of a video, and then let you introduce as well. My name is Vince Pierson. I'm Principal Strategist for Diversity and Inclusion with Sports Biz Camps. I started my career in sports at the Colonial Athletic Association, working in compliance and student athlete services. So in compliance is the rules and regulations for the NCAA, and in student athlete services, being sure that student athletes have an opportunity to develop outside of their sport. I did that for a few years before going back to grad school. Immediately following grad school, I joined minor league baseball as a head of diversity and inclusion, building out our first diversity initiative. So from there, I've had a few different roles outside of sport, and I now work with Sports Biz Camps and also consult several different clients on building out their diversity initiatives. So with that, Ash, I'll let you do a quick introduction.
Sure. I also want to share really quickly, like the questions don't have to necessarily be about maximizing your college experience. If you have specific questions for Vince and I as we get going about our careers or other questions that you may have, please jump in with those questions as well. So I am Ashley Turner. I shared that in my video. I'm currently the Director of External Affairs and Partnerships at the DeVos program, which is a graduate program at the University of Central Florida, where students get a master's in business and also sports management. Prior to that, I was a student athlete at the University of Buffalo. I'm going to let you guys guess my sport in the chat. Then I went to graduate school. I'm like you guys, graduated in that 2008-2010 timeframe when the market and the economy weren't doing well, and was unsure of what I wanted to do next. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into the questions. And so I decided to go get my master's at the University of Central Florida. From there, I got what I thought was my dream job growing up in the state of New York. I got to work at Madison Square Garden, world's most famous arena. So I was working with the New York Knicks, the New York Rangers, and the New York Liberty. So NBA, NHL, and WNBA. Got a plethora of experience there in the 2 years I spent there, and then was recruited to come and work for the Orlando Magic. So I spent about 8 years working for the Magic, a smaller market, what's considered a mid-market in the NBA. And I really got an opportunity to put my hands in a lot of things. And what I would say is put my fingerprint on a lot of things, to take something that had never been done before and sort of build it and say, like, that was my legacy. This wasn't here before and now it's here. And I had great mentors there who allowed me to expand my career. And then I got to come to the job that I'm in now and combine my love of sports without wanting to maybe work all 45 home games and concerts and all of those things with my love for working with people. And I love that I get to what I get to do now, which is prepare the next generation of sports business leaders to enter the sports industry. So that's my 2-minute elevator speech from college to now.
So we're in for a treat because literally the title of maximizing the college experience, that is what Ashley does for a living for students on a cycle basis, and she has to adjust to what the world throws at her, right? You've been in the position for, I want to say 2 years, no, a year and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're insane.
Don't round up on me. I got a lot to accomplish.
And already, sidebar, Ashley and I go way back. So we're going to have fun with this conversation, whether y'all engage or not. But in order for you to get the most of it, from it, you're going to have to engage. Christian Murray guessed track. I'll let you get to that.
Yeah. So what I do want to say is the person who guessed right, I will spend 30 minutes going over your resume and going over your LinkedIn and helping you get prepared. I'll give you my personal email. So the first person who guessed right, I'll tell you, Christian, good guess. It's not track, but the first person who guesses correctly, you'll get a 30-minute sit down with me. It'll Zoom sit down, but a sit down with me nonetheless. So
I'll put a timer on that. Y'all have until 11:30 before I guess and take advantage of that opportunity. But real quick, and this is, I don't know if we got into this last time, but we're in a pandemic now, right? And you're having to adjust the way that you operate in your role as well. What has that looked like for you? And then how do you see students making the most of it?
So at first it was really scary. So much of my job is about face-to-face relationship, and so much of what I teach students is about building relationships. So at first it was really scary, and I was like, no one's going to be hiring and what's happening. And then I really honed in on that glass half full mentality and decided more than ever, people are available, people are home. And though they might not be hiring in the way that they were before, my students have the ability to build their network like never before. And so what we've really focused on with my students, and they're a little bit different from undergrad students because they've finished their undergrad degree and they're really looking to launch their careers in the sports industry with a master's degree, is that they can network. So we build projects around networking that they had to connect with, I think it was 150 people, and with a meaningful connection over the time that they were in the program. So from the time the pandemic officially started in March until they graduate this coming December. And then we really had an opportunity to work with companies that are not local. So we do what's called industry projects, where a company might say, hey, we really want to evaluate how we're connecting with the community, but we don't really have anybody in-house to help us look at it or create new events, or we really would love a Gen Z mentality and how to make the games more entertaining. They came to us, and I was able to take 5 students in each group and say, here's this project you're going to work on for these real companies. You're going to present to these real CEOs, these real presidents, these real directors, and do your best. I'm going to lead you and guide you and help mold across the way. And it really gave us an opportunity to work with organizations that we haven't worked with before because they're not physically here locally to sort of put our hands on it. But because everyone was virtual, it expanded our network and expanded how our partnerships and how we go about doing things. So I think the students are starting to understand, in addition to that, that there are more skills and jobs coming available that didn't exist 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. If you don't think that they're going to be hiring a director of health and safety at all of these NBA teams, if you don't think they're going to be hiring a virtual event coordinator, because let's be honest, these CEOs don't know how to Zoom. They figured it out now, but the number of times that I had to be like, your mic's not on. No, can you turn your mic on? For my leaders, because they're just not prepared to do that. So you guys are uniquely positioned to come into a role and say, this is our whole life. We've lived our whole lives digitally. We know how to tell a story digitally. That's how you're going to be marketing now. Mm-hmm. So you're uniquely positioned for that. So try to see it glass half full. I do want to quickly go to the chat. Christian, you really won the show because you guessed everything. But it is soccer, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I will be sure to get you my information when this is over, and we'll spend some time talking about it.
You touched on something, and before it slips my mind, the thing that it's always been like a globally connected world now, right? Because of social media. I remember I had friends in other states and countries on Twitter before I even left my home state of Virginia. But now we're having to really sit in that and having to learn how to optimize it. Like, it's not just the, oh, hey, cool thing on Twitter. Yeah. Now it's like, no, you're going to need to step into that space to be effective at everything from the time your first meeting until that last happy hour. So the other thing is, as digital natives, and this is something I think of with my first internship experience, I can remember the commissioner and the deputy commissioner consistently asking me into their office to help them with, they lost something on their email folder, They had this column that went away that they can't figure out how to fix it. And because I was the new kid in the office who didn't know how to fix it, I got to go into the commissioner's office and just kick it for like 15 minutes after fixing something and just ask him how things are going, or what's this trophy from in your office, just to have a conversation. And that actually led to a lot of exposure with our deputy commissioner of basketball, where we ended up building a great relationship where he would invite me to basketball games and we drive down to Harrisburg, Virginia to attend JMU basketball games. But all that one-to-one time was birthed of being able to fill a gap for them that they couldn't fill for themselves. So it's definitely because of the being digital natives, but also like, even if you're not finding out what that skill is that you do bring, that may fit into your first job description, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just an efficiency thing, but bringing that value to the table.
For sure.
So again, use the chat, submit your questions. I'm gonna start back at your first internship, Ashley. Would love to hear both the process in finding it, and then how did you make it work for you?
Yeah, I laugh because this story never gets old for me. I don't know why it's so funny to me, but my first internship was at the local news station in Buffalo, New York in December. So just picture -10 degrees, snow, freezing, all the things. And I was working on the 6 a.m. broadcast. So that internship came about because the director of sports information at the athletic department was from my hometown, and he had sort of like decided that like he wanted to follow my career because he knew my brothers who were significantly older than me. And I really I was in communication and I was in journalism. So I started to just spend time in that office with that group of individuals. And he came to me and said, "Hey, I have a friend at the news station. I know you want to go in journalism and broadcast. Would you like this internship?" And I was like, "Yeah, it sounds incredible. I want to be a broadcaster. Like I want to be on ESPN. Like this sounds incredible." Fast forward to the 2 a.m. scraping off of my car and having to get downtown Buffalo to be there at 3 o'clock start first of a shift to be ready for the 6 a.m. news. Quickly realized that like, I don't like that. I don't want to ever have my schedule be starting at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I also didn't like being on that part of sports. I wanted to be experiencing the game and a part of the game as opposed to telling the story about the game afterwards. So it was cool. I learned a lot. And what I always say that my greatest lesson from that was I learned quickly that what I did not want to do. And had I not taken that internship, I probably would have spent another year of my life pursuing that, spending time doing that because I was a junior at the time, thinking that's what I wanted to do because of what I saw on TV versus what went behind the scenes of that to make those things happen. So I joke that like worst internship ever, but the best pivot for me in my life because it helped me to better understand what I did not want to do. And sometimes internships are like that. Sometimes you take an internship, and I stuck it out. I didn't quit because I think you can do anything for a minimum of a year. I truly believe that like if you commit to, you can do it for a year. Like it might be miserable, but you can do it. And I stuck it out for the 3 months or however long it was. And at the end, I was like, thank you so much for the opportunity. I would decline to stay on. And I've never been more proud to know that I didn't want to do that I was clear on my vision. I'm like, I can take that off the table. Now I can focus and do some exploration on things that I do want to pursue and do moving forward.
That's such a nugget, Ashley, the whole of finding out what you don't want to do. That is probably, I mean, that's so native to this conversation. Maximizing college experience is finding out what you don't want to do. Yeah. So many times you may come in and say, "Oh, well, I want to be an athletic director, so I'm going to go volunteer in our athletic department, and I'm gonna be zeroed in on that only." And if you have that level of focus and certainty at 17, 18 years old, then great. But part of maximizing the college experience is identifying the things in your field and outside of it that you don't want to do.
For sure.
And you only do that by getting in and mixing it up a little bit. So that's great. So what about, and we just had this conversation. So part of me is like selfishly wanting to go into spaces we didn't get to explore. And we did talk about volunteer opportunities, and we already mentioned that you were a student athlete. What was balancing time of preparing for your career while also the busy schedule of a student athlete. What was that like for you?
Yeah, my schedule, has always been very structured. But what college taught me was to maximize the time that wasn't structured. So I was very good at showing up where I knew I had to show up. I had a 6 a.m. lift. I was going to be the first one in the gym. I was going to be on time. I was going to be invested. I had class at a certain time, and then I had practice, and we traveled a lot for games. I joke that my first semester of school, I took every one of my exams on the road because we travel Thursday through Sunday. And so we would miss class and take exams in a hotel like lobby or like office space with like a proctor. So I had to learn how to study in those times that I had free time. For me, what I realized was that as a female student athlete, I was uniquely positioned to have access to all of these people in the sports industry. You don't really think about your athletic director and your coaches and your administrators they're doing the jobs that you're interested in. So I really, especially in my first couple of years of school, freshman, sophomore year, I just spent time in the office. I volunteered, and sometimes it was just sorting papers and doing busy work. And other times I was given access or a seat at the table to learn and expand upon my skill set. So I would really just learn how to manage that time that's not already structured for you. For me, it was easy to show up for class. It was easy to show up for practice because those things were non-negotiable. It's what you do with that negotiable time. Well, listen, have fun. I'm not saying I didn't go to my fair share of parties. I went to my fair share of just taking naps. Back in the day, I used to love to nap. I don't do that as much anymore. But you really have to decide what you're going to do with that time that's in between. And for me, that looked like spending time with people whose jobs I wanted to learn more about. Because speaking of what you don't want to do, I love when students come to me, young people come to me and say, I want to be an athletic director, but I don't want to sell. I said, can you name an athletic director in the entire country who didn't come up the revenue side of sports? Because if you can't raise money, if you can't generate money for the university, you can't be an athletic director. Not you can't, it's just very, very challenging. Every athletic director, D3 to D1, has to know how to generate revenue because you have to pay for your sports. So it always makes me laugh when people say, I'm going to be an athletic director, but I don't want to be a part of the sales program. And I'm like, so you're an athletic director?
Right. That's it. And I remember having that conversation. And at one point in time, I did think I wanted to be an athletic director. And I thought, compliance was the route to go, right? You got to know the rules and regulations, and quickly realize that, no, you hire people who know the rules and regulations. Yeah. You are the face that contributes to, keeping this well-oiled machine running.
For sure.
So, there's so much more that goes into that. But yeah, there's not a single athletic director who doesn't have a, extensive experience and maybe even some of their own flavor on how to contribute to the bottom line. Let's see. Christian asked the question. Please remember to use the Q&A box to help us transition a bit. But in our current environment, how would you recommend students get that similar experience? So, we were able to, apply and volunteer and do all these things, but now we're in a digital space. So how do we recommend students get that similar experience? I'll let you start.
Yeah, Christian, great question, and thank you for it. Kind of what I said earlier is I think you have unique opportunities to participate in organizations, athletic departments that are not necessarily in your backyard. So if you didn't go to school in a big city like I did, where there's professional sports, you might only have the athletic department or a minor league team. And they're not going to say, hey, we don't need help with anything. We're all set. Especially if you're just saying, I just want to volunteer and learn. I just want to sit in the digital room and learn. What we're doing with our athletic department right now, and what my students are doing, is they're virtually providing services to the athletic department. So that means I have one person who's very interested in compliance. So every time a new bylaw comes out, which is changing every day in the NCAA with the coronavirus, with name, image, and likeness, they're asking her to read it first and highlight the things that she thinks are important. She doesn't have to be in the office to get that experience, but she did have to build that connection. So I would recommend reaching out to people who you want to learn from and asking them, what projects are you working on that I could be a part of? because people are looking for support more than ever. A lot of these athletic departments, a lot of these teams have unfortunately had to lay off people, and they're shorthanded. So they'll take an opportunity to engage you in a way that maybe they wouldn't have or wouldn't have had time to in the past. What do you think, Vince?
I think that, yeah, it's absolutely true. And the other piece is was how we talked about earlier, because we're having this shift into this digital environment, you should be able to leverage some skills that you've picked up being digital natives. All the digital conferences that are happening. When we did our Sport Biz Camps, the Career Virtual Exploration Camp, we needed support from students to help us get through the event. We don't get through that without their support. So I think it's just kind of keeping your foot on the gas and continue to be curious and pushing to find those opportunities, because I don't think that they're going to be more limited. They're going to be very different, but they haven't gone away.
Right.
And so you make a great point. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be me directly volunteering to the success of an event. Maybe I'm just taking advantage of the fact that everybody's on Zoom all the time now. Perhaps I could meet 3 people who are doing the things that I think I want to do. And it's a higher touch point connection now, because instead of a 15-minute phone call, we sit on Zoom for 30 minutes, and we're all going through a pandemic. So we already have something in common. So, I think it's just being creative and keeping that approach, or keeping your foot on the gas to, if you want to build that experience, not letting this stop you from doing it.
Yeah, I agree.
So one of the things we didn't get to talk about was breaking into sports specifically. It's a very buddy industry. In any industry, there are coveted positions. In sports, sometimes the internship roles are coveted positions. I remember trying to get into the NBA, and I was like, man, I wish I knew 5 people who could slot me in, because it felt like that's what you needed. How are you advising students, just generally, and then perhaps, we talked about the pandemic enough. Well, not enough, but a bit. But how do you advise students on breaking into sports specifically? Like, what to be prepared for and how to approach that?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think the first thing, and I hate to beat a dead horse, but I think the first thing is doing some research, because the industry is buddy. Now, I also think at the same, while the industry has been buddy for the last 100 years or whatever, I think that, again, this generation is uniquely positioned that people are looking for diverse hires, that people are looking for young people to join their companies. So I think more than ever, there's going to be a group of people who have never been exposed to the sports industry, or they've never hired from this group or this college, or whatever. They're going to start looking for diverse ways to hire people. It's not just going to be, I'm going to hire my friend. We both went to the same Ivy League school. Unfortunately, that's how it was for a while. So I think the first thing is doing some research on who's in the industry currently. Who can you connect with on LinkedIn to get an understanding of what their role is, how they're positioned in the hiring process, and then just reaching out and finding unique ways to tell your story of what you've been doing and how it relates to the job you're applying to. Breaking into sales, unfortunately, for a lot of people, is through sales. Breaking into the sports industry. Like, a lot of people start with selling season tickets, and everybody's like, and I'm not of the belief that you're required to sell season tickets. You have to do what's called inside sales route to get into sports. It's not, but you're never gonna be negatively impacted by knowing how to sell, because in everything you do, whether it's diversity, equity, inclusion, whether it's community relations, whether it's corporate partnerships, whether it's basketball operations, at some point, you're at the very least going to be selling your position. So breaking into sports and is oftentimes through that sales industry or that sales lane, but you learn valuable skills there. And again, I think you can do anything for a year. So if you spend a year saying, I'm going to sell, and more than ever, people are going to be trying to figure out how to generate revenue, skill that you're going to be like, man, I wish I didn't learn how to do that.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's funny that you say that, because my first job offer after grad school was with Monumental Sports Entertainment in a sales position, and I dreaded the thought of going into sales, but I found the excitement for it because I was going to challenge myself. I had a job in sports. Minor league baseball came with the offer shortly thereafter, and I went with the dream job. But it really is, and one of my mentors, Mike Redlick, who, God rest his soul, he pushed me to consider sales. He introduced me to salespeople, so much so that I started to consider it, and I actually did get excited about it. But that's a great point. It's never a skill that you'll regret having. And I've seen people even recently transition from account executives into community relations managers. So it's sometimes you got to get in, and then kind of do your maneuvering. So we also didn't get to the why behind sports. So I know for me, I chose to major in sport management because I played sports and I couldn't play anymore. And it was like, okay, well, I want to stay close to the game. Yeah. I quickly began my career and realized that I'm not passionate as much as what's happening on the court as what's happening in the environment, this unique environment that sports creates for people to experience community, to experience difference. It creates a unique communal and familial environment. So that is now my why. When we think about sports, two questions for you. One, what is your why? And then two, how important is it to have a why when you're approaching that career in sports?
I think that's a great question. The first thing I would say is at the DeVos program, we believe in the power of sport. So there are very few things that bring people together and around a common goal like sports. So after music, which I think is probably even above sports, because at a concert, you're all singing the same song. At a game, you either you're cheering for the same team or you're rooting against each other. But sports is a unique thing where like you all want to see a positive experience. You all want to see your team win. You rally with the people around you. So for me, it's how sports has the ability to change society, change communities. And we're seeing that across the sports landscape right now, whether that's the NHL or the NBA or Major League Baseball, minor league baseball, all these things are just changing the way we think about society and community and race and all of these things. So for me, that's my why. I think I've never been around any other industry that says like, man, I'm super excited about selling a computer. People love Apple products, but not enough to change a society. And I think historically, you'll see that sports has really had the ability to change societies and change the landscape of how we communicate and how we live. I think it's important to have a why because sports is a tough industry. Yeah. Don't work 9 to 5. You're gonna miss Christmas. This past year was the first time in 10 years that I went home for Christmas consecutively. I did not go home for Christmas for 10 years. And I don't say that as like me or poor me, but I worked for the Knicks for a while, and everybody knows the Knicks play on Christmas Day, especially before they got really horrible. But like the Knicks play on Christmas Day. So for years, I worked on Christmas Day. The first thing I would do was get up and head to the office. And then when I came to the Magic, they were good for a while. So they were doing the thing that was even more annoying, which was playing the day after Christmas. So it wasn't enough time to go home. I had to be here. And so you have to make that commitment. Like, do you love sports enough that you want to be a part of what's happening in the arena, on the field, whatever the case may be? Or do you want to enjoy sports? And my mentor, Dr. Sutton, said that to me when I was in graduate school. Ashley, you love sports so much. You need to decide if you want to make enough money to be a season ticket holder and enjoy sports, or you want to leverage sports for what it is and work in it. And it's kind of an interesting, because I think in my 20s, I wanted to be in the mix. And I still want to be in the mix, but I want to be just a little bit further away where I don't have to work 125 events a year. I'm in the games when I want to. My students are involved, so I'm connected to sports, but I'm not working in sports in that way. But you couldn't pay me not to work when I was in my 20s. Like, you couldn't pay me to miss a game. They'd be like, oh, you could take the game off. Like, no, I'm good. I'm going to be at this game. Because there's just something magical about it. So I think it's important to have a why, because you're going to work a lot. friends are going to be like, oh, we're having happy hour. And you're going to be like, oh, it's my third game of the week. And don't work in baseball because it's going to be your 7th game of a 10-day homestand. So I don't mean don't work in it, but be prepared that you're going to miss out on some things. But I also remember the best memories of my life are around my time in working in arenas and on fields. I got to go to the first ever Ice Bowl, which was like the outdoor NHL game back in 2007 with like the Sabres and I think it was the Pittsburgh Penguins. I fell on the ice. It was, I never forget that. It was, my mom was like, I saw you fall. And I was like, that's so cool. It was so cool to me. And it's like, you can't make those memories without physically being there. So that's my 2 cents. Vince, do you agree?
I do. I think that the why is so important for those exact reasons. I've worked in minor league baseball. Now I've had a cushy career in sports. I worked at the league. I worked at the CAA, so I'm at a conference office in college.
Mm-hmm.
And then I worked at the headquarters for minor league baseball. So I've always gone home for Christmas. I've always spent Thanksgiving with my family. And the only time I didn't actually was when I was in the DeVos program because I couldn't afford a flight home.
Wow.
So it's not lost on me that I've had a cushy experience, especially through my 20s in sports. But because I'm in this industry and because I have friends in the space and because of my proximity, I know that the folks who are working in minor league baseball, those homestands are 7A to 10P. If you get out on time, and if there's rain, then you may have to come earlier. You may have to stay later. I don't think that you do that job unless it really matches up to your why.
Yeah.
So I think that you really have to spend time with that and know, you don't have to know what you want to do, but you got to know what the motivation is a bit. Even when I was passionate about just playing sports and that was what drove me, it was enough to keep me there past midnight if that's what it took. Mm-hmm. Without that driver, I do think that, it's going to be taxing no matter what. I think without that passion and driver behind it, it's eventually the momentum is going to start to dwindle a little bit. So no, I think that's good. And I'm glad that, I hope that lands well. And matches up good too to, what we started with of maximizing the college experience and learning what you don't want to do. You might have your first homestand and say, man, sports is not it for me. That's not the ticket. I think you got to be open to having that experience. So we're not up on time, but I do want to remind you, maximize this experience, use that chat box, ask those questions. We want to make sure that we're asking the things or answering the questions that you want to hear. I want to move into networking, especially considering, and we talked a bit about it with the pandemic, but what do you think for college students is necessary for them to consider or be mindful of? What's that best approach to building your network while you're still in college?
Yeah, I think you have to remember that people want to build relationships. There's very few CEOs, vice presidents, directors, managers, whatever the case may be, who aren't also looking to build their network, who aren't looking for interesting, new, diverse talent. And I think it's being intentional about what you're looking for. It's not just hitting a 15 friend request. It's probably not what it's called, but on LinkedIn requests of just no, nothing. Like I decline anybody who just, let's be friends. Like if we didn't have a conversation, if you don't put in there like, hey, I'm Christian, I go to this school, we met on this Sports Biz Camp Zoom, I would love to connect with you. I'm not interested because I know what it means to build relationship. So I think with networking, you have a unique opportunity because everyone's home, everyone's in front of their computers to do some research. I love it when people reach out to me and say, hey, you went to the University of Buffalo, like, do you love chicken wings? It's like a silly thing, but it always like, hey, you paid attention to notice that like, that's important to me and that's my alma mater and I love that school. So I think being intentional about who you're networking with and who you're spending time trying to get to know, people want to build relationships. So just be intentional about that.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really great. And I think that, the only thing I'd add is and we talked about it earlier, the strategic and intentional piece. And now I'm looking at our notes from the earlier conversation. And I think that was so poignant and important, because you've got to think beyond even your own experience to the time of the folks that you're reaching out to. And Christian's on this call, and we talked about this not too long ago. When you're connecting with potential mentors or just expanding your network, and you're a college student, I'll be frank, I'm not always going to want to sit and listen to how your semester went. So have questions that you want to ask, and maybe you can send emails that are quick updates, rather than scheduling calls to tell me about, your sports management 101. All due respect, I expect you did well. I don't necessarily need to hear about that experience. So I think it's being strategic and intentional. And then also just being mindful of the folks that you're reaching out to.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about getting out of your comfort zone. And I know that we talked earlier about this with your transition into grad school. So could you talk a bit about, what went behind that decision in the transition, and kind of where you saw it being beneficial for you?
Yeah, so for me, I mentioned earlier that I graduated from college in 2008, which was at the height of, the economic crash of that time. So not only did I know that I didn't want to be a broadcaster at this point, but I also, no one would hire me for that, even if I did want to do that. So I started to in the middle of that semester, or in between semesters, I started to think about what I wanted to do, what jobs were available to me. And I went to my mentor at the time, and still, Ward Manuel, who's the athletic director at the University of Michigan, and said, I don't know what I should do. And he actually recommended graduate school. And he said, I think you should go to University of Central Florida. The directors there are really good. It's a top program. And I was like, that's like a lot of ways away from my family. And I don't think that's a good idea. And I had only been a scholarship athlete. So I was like, who's going to pay for that? I had a lot of questions in my mind. He was like, at this point, when we're not hiring people and there's not a lot of jobs available, what are you going to do to sharpen yourself? And I think it should be grad school. So I went and interviewed. I fell in love with not only with the campus, but with the directors, with the other people who were in the program. And it really stretched me. I was the furthest I've ever been away from my family. And now I live here full time, which is crazy to think about, because you couldn't have paid me then. And I was like, as soon as I finish, I'm going to leave and get back up north, which I did. But then I ended up back here. And it taught me so much resilience, because I was by myself for the first time. It was the first time that I wasn't in a team. I took summer classes before the fall semester started. So I was literally on campus by myself. No one from my cohort was there. I wasn't part of any program at that point. I was just taking prereq classes to get into the program officially. And it taught me how to be resilient. I walked a lot. I didn't have a car. I read a lot of books. I learned how to make new friends. I learned how to make ends meet more than I ever had in my entire life. And it really stretched me. It taught me a lot about myself. And again, I keep saying it, but about resilience, and that I had the ability to do hard things. So that when the next hard thing came, I could reflect back and say, like, I can do this. I've done hard things before.
Yeah, that it's such a good point. I asked that because I'm partly thinking of my own experience, and we're similar. I grew up in Virginia and didn't leave Virginia. I actually didn't get on a flight to leave Virginia for the first time until I was 20 years old. And then I spent the first few years of my career in Virginia, and at a point, I had a mentor challenge me and realized that my comfort zone is now my blind spot. I was blind to how comfortable I was in just my home state. And going to the University of Central Florida provided me an opportunity to get out of that comfort zone and start to grow outside of it. And I remember, it's not always, to Ashley's point, it's not a pretty thing. Like, it's not always glitz and glamour when you get outside of your comfort zone. Discomfort is not always fun. My first day of class at the University of Central Florida, I'm excited. I'm like, I'm gonna make the most of this experience. I throw on my shirt and tie and get ready to go to class, ignorant to how hot 95 degrees can be. And by the time I got to class, I had sweat through my shirt. So, that's part of like the comfort zone, or getting out of the comfort zone. That's part of the experience. So it's not always, I think on the other side of it, you very rarely hear people who regret challenging themselves to get out of their comfort zone, but that doesn't mean that it's always, sunshine and rainbows when you do. So I know we're coming up on time. I want
It
to.
looks like we have a question in the chat. I know.
Oh, I missed it.
So I'll pose it to you. Steve
Okay.
asked, what are some ways we can offer ourselves as a resource or source of help to contacts, connections we make?
So that's a good question, because a lot of times you hear the conversation around mentorship being a mutually beneficial relationship, and it should be. For me personally, the way that students provide value to me is that you show up to our meetings prepared. You show up to our meetings on time, and you have questions and a purpose for the call. It's not like a, hey, what's up? And we just chat. No, you have something you want to get from it. You may even have a direct deliverable, like, hey, can you review my resume? And don't let that be your blanket go-to. But there's a specific reason. Maybe it's, can you review my resume because I'm applying for this internship, rather than just, I want somebody to look at my resume. But if you actually do want to position yourself as a resource, I think it's being cognizant of what's happening in the industry. I'm trying to think of a recent happening in sports. Nothing comes to mind immediately, but things like the Sports Business Journal, ESPN Undefeated,
Mm-hmm.
Fast Company, being well read on what's happening in current events around sports, so that you can speak to what's happening in the world of the person you're connecting with, and maybe start to connect dots on here's my thoughts on, or did you see this? So I think it's more so being able to add value to the conversation than immediately adding value to, this person's workspace, if that makes sense. We have a few questions rolling while.
And I was also gonna, just as you're looking at the questions, add to that, like, and you guys are in the best time ever to be well read. And I don't think you should, obviously don't click every like LinkedIn, Twitter link that you see as fact. Do some research behind that. But Twitter didn't exist when I was young. I remember doing a legal study in graduate school on whether Twitter was going to survive or not. I was on the losing end of that. I was like, nobody cares about this. I don't want to know your thoughts at 140 characters. I think that's how many it is. I'm not very active on Twitter. I got to be better about that. But you guys have the information. The NCAA and conferences and leagues and teams are tweeting out information of stories and things that are happening. So like SBJ has a subscription. I remember being like, I don't have $10 a month or whatever it is to send SBJ, but there are free articles involved in that. And you have access to so much information via Twitter, LinkedIn, all these things now that like just didn't exist 10 years ago. Like somebody said, well, what was your Google group when you were in grad school? I was like, there was no Google group. Like, that wasn't a thing. Like, it was just a long email. It was a chain of emails. There was no like nice Google group to like go back and forth. Like we had to physically come together and work as a group.
We became old so quickly because
it just happened because technology is so fast.
I was literally about to say, yeah, I remember when Twitter came out. Like it was my sophomore year in college, and I was like, man, for what? And then I got on it, and I was stupid and reckless on it. I had to delete my profile a few times. But yes, so we graduated into that audience. Dwayne asked about sharing our contact information. I don't mind sharing
The
mine.
Dr. Lapchick stories. That's one.
You probably got those more than me right now.
Yeah. Are we allowed to cuss on this? Dr. Lapchick is not a cusser, but so I will say that Dr. Lapchick is now my boss. So I'll say two things about that is your heroes become human when you work with them every day. And so it was challenging for me to go from a student to a professional and then to a peer and work with Dr. Lapchick in that way, because I still do have such tremendous respect for him. But now in my new role, I have to, in order to be good at my job and for us to be good at what we do as a program, challenge him on things and do things like that. So I think just having that professional maturity is important, and that'll happen for you, each of you along your career. Dr. Lapchick does not cuss often, so I'm going to tell this story in the way that he would tell it because this is how he told it to me. We recently had our virtual class trip and we had an opportunity to hear from some of the leaders at the NBA. And he talks about how the NBA rarely misses. They're very prepared. If you know anything about the NBA, their statements are ready. They're prepared to answer questions. It's very unusual to catch the NBA flat-footed, for lack of better words. And early in his career and early in David Stern's career, may David Stern rest in peace, Dr. Lapchick was providing a speech for the entire NBA organization. And it was the first time they were doing any kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion speech. And Dr. Lapchick had missed the preparation, and the NBA does a lot of preparation before you present. So as he was passing David Stern on the stage, David Stern quietly whispered to him, "Good luck, don't fuck it up." And I always laugh because, like, if you know Dr. Lapchick, he said that's the most nervous he's ever been to give a speech, and also prepared him to not waste any words, so that he was prepared to make sure that what he said was impactful and that it wasn't a lot of fillers and all these other things, that to not waste any words. And I love that story because it not only is it funny because David Stern and Dr. Lapchick are so different language, but I've taken that lesson with me to make sure that my words are not wasted. So that's my one funny Dr. Lapchick story.
Thank you for sharing that because it makes me smile for both of the men, and it's a blessing to be able to know Lapchick, and like you said, RIP to the legend that is David Stern. I do want to be sure that we get back to the main stage. Ashley, thank you so much for spending your morning with us. Students and attendees, I hope you had a chance to take away some nuggets and gems from this. Feel free to reach out and connect with me. I'm happy to answer further questions on the topic. For now, I'm going to rush you back to the main stage. Please jump back in. We are hearing a presentation from Brandon McMillan of Metabolics. Ash, thanks again.
Thank you, guys. I put my email in the chat.
Bye, everyone.